Hola, hola. Welcome to Dímelo with me, Claudia Pagan, where I talk to people in the sports world about their jobs, passions, and challenges. We have fun, we get personal, and sometimes it feels like a therapy session, but don't worry, it's only good fun. Hey guys, I am joined at 9 in the morning, so I'm still waking up right now by Gaby Lozada. Thank you so much. Gabby was one of the people that when I said I was going to start a podcast, she was like, I love this. I'm going to listen. And I was like, thank you so much. And she goes, if you want me to hop on and chat with you, I will. So I love it. So thank you so much. I messaged you immediately to do this. So you're one of my first interviews. I'm so excited. You're with the USL now, but you were with Minnesota in MLS first. So I want to talk about your background,
Yeah,
the career that you currently have, and what you've done in the past.
of course. Well, first off, I want to say thank you for having me. Like you said, I was so excited by this concept of yours. And I am such a big proponent of like elevating women's voices in sports and very specifically elevating Latin women's voices in sports. And I just want to see more of us in this industry. And even more specifically for me, more Latin women in PR. I think there's a really great group of us in MLS, despite the fact that I don't work in MLS anymore. But there are a lot of really amazing Hispanic women doing PR and on the MLS side. Then I just adore all of them. But like, I want to see more of us. So to start off, I was born in Venezuela. So we'll go way back here.
Let's do it.
I was I was born in Venezuela, and but my family we moved up here to the U.S. When I was 6, and we ended up in Wisconsin. My dad was getting his master's at a school there, and throughout that whole process, eventually my parents decided that they wanted to stay in the U.S. instead of going back. Anybody who knows anything about the current situation in Venezuela can probably guess that around 99, 2000, 2001, things sort of started to change for the country. And my parents decided that it was better for us to stay here. So we moved to Minnesota, and I spent my entire life in Minnesota up until last summer.
Wow.
I grew up in the Twin Cities. I went to college in the Twin Cities. Even when my parents moved to California, I stayed in the Twin Cities. And I loved Minnesota. It's like one of my favorite places, and I would move back in a few years, and that's where I would choose to raise my family. I love that place. But eventually, after spending so much time, you find, especially when you work in sports, you realize that like you have to be willing to move,
Hmm.
relocate to get into the industry, to advance in the industry. So that's sort of what ended up happening. Um, but I thought I would end up working in baseball. My dad worked in baseball for 10, almost like 12 years or so, between
Oh.
working for the Twins and working for the Giants. And I loved the experience I got as a family member of his working in that industry and sort of starting to get an inside peek as to like what working in sports actually meant. And he worked in a completely different area. He was in like finance and he was officially in procurement, basically purchasing and buying all of the giveaways, as well
Okay.
as like all of the office supplies for the organization. But he had such a great job, and he seemed so happy. And like, despite all of the things that you hear about working in sports, there were all those benefits, and it just seemed so fun. And so I was like, I want to work in sports. Where within that, I had to figure that out. Like that's what I went to school for. At first, I thought I was going to be a journalist. Like I think 19-year-old me would have loved to have been you. Honestly, to have the know-how to do appropriate interviews and to feel this comfortable like on camera. Like I would have loved to have done that at 19, and then I took some journalism classes and like I
You're
can't do this.
nope.
This doesn't feel right. Everybody else felt like they got it, and I was like, I don't have this. It didn't click for me. So then I took a PR class, and that felt so much more natural. So then at that point I was like, okay, how does this fit with my dream of working in sports, my dream of working in baseball? And that's when you start to make connections and start to, do informational interviews and start to talk to people. I found my way back to the Twins through a marketing internship. Like, I think when I was in college, I knew that the Twins had a really robust internship program, and that they kicked it off with like this giant career fair at the ballpark in the fall. And then so that kicked off like the entire application process, and then they always had their interns hired by the end of the year so that they could all start after the new year. So at a certain point I was like, that's okay, that's my goal. I'm going to get one of these internships. And ended up doing a marketing internship that was a little bit more focused on their the diversity efforts. And that felt like a really great way for me to get into the industry, because even at the time I still didn't feel all that comfortable with the PR aspect of it. I was terrified of media relations, and it felt so like results driven in a way that it didn't feel like there was a room for error. And I remember speaking to the head of PR for the Giants one summer, and she just terrified me so much. She made it seem like media were like the most difficult people to work with, most demanding. And I was like, I don't want to do that. So I went the market. So I was like, okay, I'll do this marketing internship. And if this is what gets me in, this is what gets me in. And the funny thing is that this was like a respected Latin woman in the industry who was the head of comms for the Giants at the time. And she scared me so much. But I think she was, what she was trying to do was just, she was trying to be realistic, and she
Yeah.
was trying to be like, hey, this isn't for, this job
The
isn't,
faint of heart.
exactly,
It's
this job
not for
isn't,
everybody.
exactly. And I was still just like trying to figure out so many things in my head that it sort of turned me off at one point, but eventually I made it back through a variety of different ways that we'll get to. But like, I will never forget that conversation. And I've told my dad about that many times, and he goes, wow, she's such a nice lady. I can't believe she was like that with you. I was like, I don't know. She was scary. But
That could
really, she was just like a boss lady.
it could be the realistic thing, because there are sometimes, I will say this, there are some times where people are like how is a job, and then sometimes it's not that I'm trying to talk about the negatives, but it's like, listen, like you need to be willing to give up your weekends, your
Yes.
holidays, like you might deal with this and this, like
Yep.
just be prepared.
Yep. And the thing is that I do that now too. Like I have,
Yeah. Now
students
you're the
talking to
scary
me.
lady.
Like I have students talking to me about, what it's like to do sports PR. And I'm like, yeah, but like, the pay isn't great. I don't have a life during the summer. All my weekends are gone. I travel all the time. But I love it. It's great. But it is like, here are all the negative things, but I still love it despite all of that.
It was funny. We had a panel the other day. Not a panel, but we had this like event where we were having it's like this after school group for Latinas in high school in the DC area. And one of they I forget what the question they asked was, but like several people said, the pay isn't great. And I'm like, guys, why are we highlighting, like it was a one thing that everybody across the board was saying to these girls. And I'm like, why is this the first thing we're saying? But it's like, it is like, you have to be honest, you have to be truthful. But it's funny because then all the people that then talked about the money would then say, but we love it. We love the
Yeah.
environment. And like, it's not a surprise that you don't
And
get into sports for the money.
right. And I think one of the reasons why I think a lot of us who work in sports do that is because we know that it is an incredibly competitive industry. Everybody wants to work in sports. And we don't say it to make it less competitive by like trying to convince people not to do it. We say it to just to be realistic, because a lot of people think that working in sports is this like super glamorous, and they think that because sports makes a lot of money in general, and because athletes make a lot of money in general, maybe not in soccer in the US, but in general, they think that like the employees do too,
Yep.
and that we live this sort of like glamorous life. And while there are glamorous aspects of what we get to do, that isn't the reality. And it sort of does weed out the people who aren't as serious about it, to get to the people that are like, I don't care, I'll do whatever it takes to work in this industry because this is what I'm passionate about. And that's sort of, I got to that place because after I worked at the Twins, I had somebody tell me that I needed to not work in sports, that my next job needed to be something else, because if I kept doing a job in sports, I would sort of get pigeonholed. And that sort of got to my head. So I started doing agency work for a while. And I did not care for it, but it wasn't until I got out of the agency life that I realized that it wasn't for me. And let me tell you, working in an agency life in Minneapolis as a Hispanic woman is incredibly isolating
How come? Why do you say that?
because just given the demographics of the Twin Cities in general, while an increasingly more diverse region, public relations is a very white dominated field. And it's a very female dominated field until you get to sports comms. It's like all of the men who went to school to do PR ended up in sports, all of the women ended up everywhere else.
Mhm.
And so I worked in agencies and in spaces that were a ton of women, but like very few women of color.
Yeah.
And I never got to use that part of me. It was another environment in which I felt like I had to sort of diminish a part of me to fit in and to do my job. And I had spent a ton of time growing up doing that. And one of the things I loved about my time with the twins and in like a very specific diversity marketing role was that that side of me was brought out, and I got to use that in a job setting. And I never thought I was going to be able to do that. And so after being laid off from one agency job, starting to work at do work on the nonprofit side because it was the first job that hired me after I was laid off, got laid off there. I was like, I am spinning my wheels, working in spaces, working in industries that I don't care about.
Yeah.
And this was 2018. So I was trying to get back into sports. I started working part-time for the Timberwolves with their PR staff on the game day side, and that got me back in. And that was so much fun. I got to really understand what the game day like environment was, what it meant to actually cater to media during a game day and how to prep for that. So by the time the job for Minnesota United came around, I almost didn't apply.
What?
It was a manager job. And you don't understand, I had been laid off for the second time in 1 year. And the two jobs, they were two like entry level positions. I hadn't lasted. I had, as far as like entry level positions, I'd only had a little over a year of experience. This was a manager position. I'd never managed anybody. And I was not confident. Like and even within my first year at Minnesota United, anytime my boss was like, we need to have a conversation, I was terrified he was going to like fire me,
Yeah.
to the point where I had to tell him, you need to preface these conversations a little differently because your girl has some
You're
PTSD.
stressing me out.
I
So
have PTSD.
what made you then apply? Like what changed that for you?
I had a coworker at the Timberwolves. She's one of the other game day staffers. She and I were looking for jobs together. And so like we were at the check-in table to check in media, and we're like on our computers trying to on Teamworks Online trying to find jobs. And I had kept this one open for a couple days, and she was like, you have to apply. Like, I'm reading this job posting and I know you can do all of this. You speak Spanish. This is going to be great. You know this market. Like, you're fine. Just apply for it. And it wasn't until years later that I really realized how often it is that women don't apply for jobs if they feel like they don't match up every single thing. And like having to push through that is just, it's so often.
It's difficult.
And what I had on my side was that my boss at the Timberwolves at the time knew my former boss at Minnesota, Eric. And so I told him, I was like, look, you know that I just got laid off from my job and I love working with you guys. I will take up as many shifts with you guys as I can, but I need to find a full time job. Would you mind sharing my resume with this man on my behalf? And Eric Durkee will tell you that made the difference. That got me in the room. And then
Is
after that, you just, you charm your way through your interview. You kill the interview, but more often than not, the thing is just landing the interview when you have hundreds of people applying for the same job.
it's very difficult. Like connections, I mean, it's gotten me the two jobs that I've
Mhm.
had out of college is the connections that I've had that really makes a difference. It's what well, 'cause it lots of people will apply for a job, and
Mhm.
it's both good and bad. It's bad
Yep.
if you don't have the connections and you're qualified for a job,
Yep.
but when you do have the connections, it really can make the difference.
Yep. Because there was a point in time where I was applying to a ton of baseball jobs, whether it was on the comm side, social media, marketing, or community relations. I was just trying to apply, trying to see like if this was the way that I got back in, but I had no connections anywhere. And I had developed a lot of connections in the Twin Cities and within like the PR agency life, but that was not the environment for me. It felt very I just I just didn't fit in. It just wasn't for me. It wasn't the type of competitive environment that I enjoy. Like in sports, it's competitive, but we're competitive against other teams, we're competitive against other departments, but like not within our own organization. We'll all support each other. And I didn't feel like that was the case in an agency environment. So 2019, I start with the Loons and kick off this like insane ride of opening Allianz Field, which was like amazing to
It is one of my favorite stadiums, let me just say. It might be my favorite MLS stadium.
I mean, look, I'm incredibly biased, but it is also one of my favorite MLS stadiums. I mean, I think LAFC's is fantastic. Austin's is amazing. I haven't been to Cincinnati or Columbus's new stadium,
Those 2 are beautiful,
but I've heard wonderful things.
but I'll tell you without the bias opinion, Minnesota United, top stadium in MLS.
Allianz Field is gorgeous, and it's like a beautiful addition to the wonderful arenas in the Twin Cities. Because the Twin Cities, people don't realize, it has every single major sport in the country. The five major league sports, it has actually six of them because it has NBA, WNBA, MLB,
Right.
NHL, NFL, MLS, and it has a Division One program in the city of Minneapolis. The Gophers are a big deal. So like it's an
Yeah.
incredible for a mid-sized market, it's an incredibly saturated sports market. It has everything. So then trying like working on the PR team for Minnesota United is like trying to find a way to make sure that we get coverage amongst the midst of all of that. And we got lucky. We have two major papers in the Twin Cities that loved that set that had beat writers for the Loons, which as I found out, not every team in MLS even has that. So I think we were really lucky to get that sort of consistent coverage, but it was great to be able to, sort of develop those relationships with media. And that was one of my favorite things to do. But then I got the chance to use my Spanish and feel like I felt so much like myself in that job because I didn't have to diminish my roots. I didn't have to diminish the Hispanic part of me, the Latina part of me. And I got to share that with like a bunch of guys who were coming into this country to play this game and to be in this league. And I got to be a part of telling that story for them. And that was so enjoyable. I loved that. And that's one of the things I miss the most about being on the club side. And it made my Spanish better. Like I spent years feeling really insecure about my Spanish speaking skills to the point that I
Yes.
minored in Spanish in college so that I could be able to use it
Yeah.
in like a business setting. And it still took me a few months into working with Minnesota United to feel comfortable, like really comfortable speaking Spanish like professionally.
No, I'm the same way, and that's one big thing that I wanted to ask because I know that you, at least while you were with Minnesota, that you were using your Spanish on a daily basis, and I will say, like, I grew up, so my family's from Puerto Rico,
Mhm.
but I grew up only speaking Spanish at home and then English
Yep,
everywhere else. So it wasn't until
same.
I got to DC that with DC United that then I was like exposed to Argentinians and like all these other people. And I'm like, listen to all these accents. I was like, I can't understand what anyone's saying. I was
I
only
know.
used to one accent, and that's Puerto Rico.
Yes. My first year we signed, so I had players from Cuba, Colombia, and Costa Rica and Ecuador when I first started. All of those accents I was relatively accustomed to. Those were fine. We signed a 17-year-old kid from Uruguay. I'd never heard that accent before. I was like, "I don't understand what this child is saying. I don't understand what this kid is saying." I would replay the audios over and over and over again because I couldn't pick out the words. It took me like a month to be able to confidently be like, "Yes, that is what this kid is saying. I can translate for him appropriately now."
It's it's so difficult, and it's
It's
like
so
those points where, like, Spanish is already my second language,
Mhm.
and, you know, obviously my English obviously is the best because that's my native language, is what I
Yep.
use more often than Spanish. So, like, there are points where I've already doubted my Spanish,
Mhm.
and then I get to the point where then I'm speaking with players from other countries, and then I doubt it even more because, like you said, like, I'm like, I am supposed to be fluent in Spanish, and I say that
Yep.
I'm fluent in Spanish, but then I come across a player and someone's like, "Hey, what did they say?" I'm like, "I have no freaking clue."
Yep.
And, like, people don't understand that, like, it's different dialects. Like, the way that I always describe
Yes.
Spanish is because people are like, "Oh, you speak Spanish? You can speak to anyone." I'm like, "Listen, there are certain words that, like, might be a bad word in Puerto Rico, but people out there are using, like, on a daily basis or, like, vice versa, and I use random words that people are like, "I don't know what you're saying." So then I'm like, "Am I not fluent in Spanish?"
Yep.
Like, I mean, how did you, because that's one of the biggest things is like, I kind of feel like an imposter sometimes where I'm like,
Oh,
"I'm not
yes,
actually
yes.
Latina, like, I can't speak Spanish." And it's like, "No,
Yep.
like, shut up, you actually can." Like,
Yes.
did you deal with stuff like
Yes.
that and, like, sometimes think, "Maybe I shouldn't even be speaking Spanish?"
Yes. Especially when I started, I remember, like, so clearly, I had to do so I have a few stories, but this first one, when I first started, I had to do, an interview with Ozzy Alonso.
Uh-huh.
He was, like, one of, like, 5 major signings heading into the 2019 season for Minnesota United, and, I quickly realized that it was better for him to do them in Spanish than in English just because his English just wasn't that great.
Yeah.
And so I thought I was gonna be behind the camera asking him these questions. They throw me in front of the camera. I'm sure if you went to the Minnesota United YouTube and, like, dug deep into 2019, you will find me in one of these videos, and it was, like, the first time I ever really had to talk to him, and I knew what a big deal he was, and I was still, like, a little starstruck just in general to be around the athletes because 'cause it'd been a long time,
Yeah.
and I wanted to do so well. And there was the Spanish language aspect of it, and it is horrendous. Like, just a terrible, terrible interview, and when I get nervous, I stutter. And
Uh-huh.
sometimes when you're trying to flip-flop back and forth between languages, my brain sort of freezes, and then I stutter, I sort of get choked up on a word, and I've always been really self-conscious of that because it feels like, to the outside world, that I don't know the language as well as I'm supposed to. When in
Yeah.
reality, it's actually really difficult to flip-flop between languages, and it's
It's
a lot of work for your brain to do, and
Yeah.
sometimes that's how it presents itself. But I'm still like, it's still super it feels really embarrassing because like you said, we're talking to guys who speak the language fluently, and they expect us to translate to them in Span and from Spanish to
Yeah.
English, but sometimes it takes us a little longer, or and with Ozzy, because he knew English, he would be a little bit more critical, be like, "Hey, that's not exactly what I said. Let's try and fix this together."
Ah.
Um, and then a few years later, I had a player who he was not kind. And he at one point, I can't remember exactly what he said, but he said it in front of all of the guys, all of the Hispanic group of guys, and basically made a comment making fun of me for my Spanish and that my Spanish wasn't very good. And I was so mad. I was so mad. It felt so disrespectful. And I was like, there's also no way that this man would have said this to me if I
No.
wasn't.
Oh, 100%.
And then he said it in front of all of the other players. And it was so embarrassing. I was so mad. I remember calling my boss and being like, I don't know what to do. This guy doesn't respect me, blah, 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 blah. And then we traded him and it was the best thing ever. Um, but it hurt because it was like the one thing that I've always been self-conscious about. And he pinpointed it and he said it out loud and he said it in front of many people. And it hurt.
It would I would have left work that day. If someone
Yeah.
upsets me, sometimes I'm just like, "Listen, I gotta leave. I can't deal with this." In the moment,
I
I would have
walked
had I
away.
would I would have been I would have like cried from that because that's
I did.
yeah, and rightfully so because that is so like. And here's the thing: is he might not have even said it to you one on one. He wanted to make that comment in
100%.
front of everyone to like seem like the
100%.
big guy in the room.
100%. He, you know, because I don't want to say too much about him as
Yeah,
an
yeah,
individual, but like it was exactly that. And like I said, there is no way that if I was a man, he wouldn't have said that. He comes from, he came from a country in South America where we know that South America is still fairly misogynistic. And one of the things that I get really passionate about is not just like women in sports, but like women in sports PR, because there's
yeah,
not a lot of us. And to show that women can work around athletes and be not only professional but do a really really good job. And that
yeah.
also shows them, especially these guys that come from cultures that where this isn't very common, that like we're meant to be taken seriously and we can do this job. And like the more of us that are around them, the less of a novelty it becomes. And I also feel that way about, not just in just like being taken seriously as like, hey, I can do this job well, but also being taken seriously in like, hey, I demand a level of respect that you probably wouldn't be showing me if you saw me somewhere else. And, not being hit on a consistent basis by athletes, particularly the Hispanic athletes, because they know you can speak Spanish, so they know that they can say things to you that no one else will understand, and finding ways to shake that off and laugh it off, because at the end of the day, you still need things from them.
It's difficult. It's something that, and I'm glad you're highlighting this, because all of us have different experiences in sports, and some of us, depending on where we've been and what sport we've been, like have experienced more than others. And it's a question that's like probably the number one question I get from any woman who wants to talk sports with me and talk about my experience. And
Yep.
like you just have to prove yourself
Mhm.
double the amount. And then like we're talking about, if you're Latina and you also speak Spanish but it's not perfect, that's something else to add to the plate that
Yep.
someone's going to critique you on. And it's like you can't make a single mistake. And it's so annoying because like a man can make a mistake about anything. Like maybe he gets like, I don't know, the name of a player wrong or like the simplest fact wrong. And it's like,
Mhm.
oh, I just brain fart, whatever.
Yep.
But a woman gets it wrong. Oh, you don't know sports, blah, blah, blah. Like you're just here
Yep.
because you're a woman or just like you got by because you're pretty or whatever it
Right.
is. And it's like, I have the opportunity like for a freaking reason, but
Mhm.
it sucks because even when you get the job and you're like, yeah, I got the job, it's like, okay, but like, can you keep the job? Like, you're a girl.
Mhm.
I'm like going on a
Mhm.
tangent now. I don't even know if
No,
any of
look, I
you get
feel you, because especially in
constantly.
my first year, I kept a lot of things to myself, because I didn't want that I was, dealing with that, because I didn't want my boss and other people around me to think that I couldn't handle it. Look, I knew heading into this industry that there were going to be things, uncomfortable situations that I would find myself in, that I would have to find a way to deal with. Even at the Twins, I had, an uncomfortable situation. And so at that point I was like, you know what? This is part of it, but this doesn't have to be the only thing. And I can work through this. I can deal with this, and I can find a way to avoid this, because this is really at the end of the day what I want to do. But even
Yeah.
back to what you were saying, like even trying to make a relationship with these individuals in a way that so that they feel comfortable with you, so that they can trust you, so that they will do the things that you ask of them. There's so many different ways to do that, and like I had to go about it a completely different way than my boss could. And I had to find certain things, topics to be able to ask them about, to create small talk and to create conversations as a way to get to know each other and to relate, that I don't think my boss really had to think about it as
Yeah.
as much as I did, because it just was a little bit more natural. Like
Yeah.
man to man, you just relate a lot easier. But then also in the back of your mind, it's like, how are people going to perceive this interaction?
Yes. I have to be so careful because
Mhm.
guys can like they can just make jokes about whatever, but
Yep.
I'm like, I need to be careful because I don't want anything to be taken the wrong way. Like, I
Yep.
even down to the like what I wear, I don't
Mhm.
even wear like leggings to anything where I have to be around the first team because it's like there's been experiences before where I've been told like, oh, you're wearing leggings to get
Yep.
around men to get
Mhm.
compliments or whatever. And it's like, it's literally athletic wear and I'm in an
Yep.
athletic setting. But ever since then, it's those little things that you have to think about that men never have to think about.
Yep.
Topics to talk about. Like I always make sure to ask about families. And it's like,
Yes!
listen, I
About the
like,
wives and the kids
yes,
consistently.
it's
Yes.
crazy the things that we have to do just to make sure there's a barrier here. Like we can talk on a friendly level, but make sure that it's not the same like bar talk or whatever that
Mhm.
you might have with another man. And
Mhm.
it freaking sucks because it's like it's just those little things that you have to think about that the men don't have to think
Extra
about. And
the extra work that people don't see. And even, like, going back to, feeling concerned about, like, personally how I feel concerned about my level of Spanish and feeling like it's not up to par. At the end of the day, the other thing that I've had to remind myself constantly is, like, nobody else around me can speak 2 languages. Like, imagine trying to speak 2 languages, and, like, that's what I tell myself, like, "Hey, this guy, I'm doing this because they don't have the people on staff to do this." Like, taking on additional roles within the organization because there aren't other people that speak the language.
how did you get past what happened? Like how did you kind of like bounce back from that?
Um, I sort of vent out loud,
Yeah.
and whether it's by myself, I talk to myself all the time, or to other people, I sort of, like, get it out, and then eventually it all sort of simmers, and I'm trying to remember, this was, like, 2021, I think, and I just I don't know, I think eventually I was just like, "Whatever, just do your job. Just keep showing up the way you have been. These other guys know that, like, that you do a good job. The other guys respect you even if this one
Yeah.
doesn't."
Yeah.
And I, fortunately, I'll say the real problem players that I've had, and problem, like, the ones that I've had the biggest issues with, I never ended up having to deal with them for too long. They were either traded at the end of the year or traded midseason, because it wasn't just like they treated me that way, that they, likely it was an issue across the locker room as well. So, um, fortunately, I think, I never ended up having that many issues.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
It's not like a thing. Like I don't know if anyone listening to this eventually will be like don't be scared because
no,
now I don't want to
I
because
know.
it's like
Okay.
now we're the scary ones. No, like it's not every single player, and
No.
I've been fortunate to have like a really good like I've been in sports for several years, and I have never like had issues with players, especially at DC United. I've never had issues, which
Yep.
is like thank God. And there's been players where like I remember I was trying to say a word to Yamil Assad in Spanish. And then I couldn't figure it out, and he like helped me as I
Yep.
stumbled, and
Mhm.
then just helped me and corrected me, and that was it. And
Yep.
then we continue the conversation. And like these players, like if I make a grammatical mistake, grammar mistake, whatever, or like whatever it is, they just like help me,
Yeah.
or they give me a second to figure out my mistake and move on. So it's like
Yes.
it's not all the players, and they know that you're trying, and they respect that you're trying and
Yes.
speaking in what's their native language.
Yes, I'll say I had more players like that than
Yeah,
the opposite. More that were willing to work with me, more that were willing to be patient with me, and more that understood, because they're also trying to learn English, most
yeah,
of them, more than that eventually understood how difficult it was to switch between the 2 languages. And, we had a couple that eventually had developed a good level of English to be able to have conversations with people in English, but not to the point where they felt comfortable doing an interview in English. And I think them being able to sort of realize that, saw just how much, like, work and how
yeah,
much effort it really was to do what I was trying to do. And I mean, I even had players who would hear like a comment being said at me. I had one specific player, and I thanked him so much after this. I sent him a text, who heard a sort of like, you know, a joking comment said at me before training or after training, one of the two, and he was like, "Hey, that's not very funny." And it meant so much to me. So much.
It's nice to have there's players that will be on your side because they see, like,
Mhm.
you enjoy your job, you show up there for them, like, you respect them, like, why
Yep.
wouldn't they show you respect? So, it's nice when they put each other in line.
Yep.
Oh,
Yes.
man. I'm so sorry that you've had
Look,
those.
it is what it is, and I think at the end of the day, you know, like, we hate to, like, be like, "Hey, the stuff that's hard makes us stronger," but, like,
Yeah,
you know, life isn't flowers and rainbows, and life, you know, there are tough things that come through life, and it does just make you a little bit stronger, a little bit
yeah,
more resilient. My first year with Minnesota United was an insane learning experience
yeah,
in a variety of different ways, not just like learning the league and then feeling comfortable within my skill set, like regaining my confidence as a professional, but then really learning how to interact with players and how to develop proper working relationships with them. That after that year, like, I developed a really good system for getting guys to understand sort of the requirements that, you know, that comes with being an athlete in the United States, because it's very, very different. And then also just like how to treat me. And it got better as the years went on, but like after that first year I was like, okay, this is, you know, this is how I need to do this, or this is definitely not how I can do this, because this didn't work. Let's try other avenues. Let's be a little bit more stern from the front. That's not going to put them off. Like, just it is just having to come up with all of these different ways to make your sense of like boundaries and like respectability known.
yeah. As because one of the things that you've said, so you're talking about us being able to speak Spanish, how much it's, it's been a big part of your career. Um, you're very passionate not only about women in PR, but Latinas in PR. What is it about Latinas, women, Latinas in PR that make us so unique and that brings something different to the role? Or just like what makes you stand out as a Latina in PR?
I think that especially in soccer, because it's such a global game, so many of us Latinas, we come from dual cultures.
Hmm.
Like, I grew up sort of trying to find the you know, the right line of balancing these two very what felt like very distinct sides of myself. Because I came to the country so early in life, I was like Americanized really quickly.
Yeah.
And then eventually my parents were like, "Oh my gosh, we like our kids can't lose the sight of us." But then every time we went back to Venezuela, even then I never felt like I fit in with that space anymore.
Yep.
And so I think that sort of being able to take experiences from different countries I think can provide a lot of context. One thing I think about all the time is first, like, the media landscape that these men are now have to live in, where while the media in South America, for example, is a lot more antagonistic,
Hmm.
they can avoid it a lot easier. But because the media in sports media in the United States is relatively unbiased, you know, you don't have reporters trying to get you.
Yep.
Not in sports media. Like, that's not really the case. You have to teach them that, but you have to also understand the place that they're coming from to do so. And I think a lot of people who haven't lived in those spaces or understand those cultures will be able to do that appropriately. And on top of that, even outside of the media stuff, it's the cultural aspect of what it's like living in America and the social dynamics and the social um, faux pas and know-hows. Like, we've seen it a lot. Unfortunately, there's a lot of like still, you know, despite how diverse and global the game of soccer is, we still see a lot of racism in it.
Hmm.
And we have to understand that while in America, racism is very, for lack of a better term, black and white,
Uh-huh.
in countries in South America where we are so mixed, it's not viewed the same. It
Yeah.
exists, but it's not viewed the same. And then we also have words that we use to describe one another that are terms of endearment, but if you say them here, they feel really offensive. And so it's understanding that that's like what they're working with, that's where they're coming from, and then trying to provide them a level of grace as they learn that like the culture they're in now is drastically different and there are different standards. And I think women are empathetic or more empathetic. Women, I think, as we've said, as we've talked about, we have to do a lot more to try to do a good job, to be taken a little bit more seriously. So we're doing excellent work, but we can relate to these individuals on a really on a deeper level, and just our background as being Hispanic women and understanding the two different cultures we have to live in.
Mhm.
The Latin side, where we get called gordita,
Aha! Yep.
negrita, and all of these things that are terms of endearment, but that if you were to translate them in English, people are like, what the heck are you saying? Why are you calling her the little fat girl?
Yep.
That's weird. So knowing that like that's how we relate to one another in our culture, and sort of being able to like empathize with them and not be like easily, and just not take everything that they say as they relate to one another and as they try to feel comfortable in this space, like so like just understanding where they're coming from. I think we as Latin women can, in this space, can do that because we have all the benefits of what it is to be a woman, the emotional IQ, the insane work ethic, and then the bilingual and bicultural aspect of it just makes it so that these men can feel comfortable with us in a different way that I think that they can feel that obviously they feel really comfortable with men because that's just like how it is, but we just relate in a slightly different way, and we just understand it a little bit more.
Yeah. I'm gonna start tearing up
Oh
because
my
like
God.
I'm gonna start tearing up because I have never known how to put any of this into words. What it's like to be a woman in sports. What it's like. Look, I'm
You're
tearing up
gonna
because
make me cry. Stop it.
that wasn't supposed to. This wasn't supposed to happen because I think this entire like conversation that we've been having, it's like you've perfectly been able to. No, now we're both tearing up. You've been able to like say put into words exactly what it's like to be a woman in sports, that you have to do this but you can't do that. It's like the Barbie movie, like
Yes.
that monologue, that it's just like what it's like to be a woman, and you have so perfectly put it into words, what it's like to be a woman in sports, what it's like to be a Latina in sports. And like I don't know, I could literally just I could end it right here, and I could in particular just clip out like the past couple minutes of what you just said, and let me just suck these tears back in and not let them roll out. This is so therapeutic. um, I I'm like at a loss for words right now because I've never been able to perfectly like capture what all of our experience is like as a woman, as a Latina in sports, and I think you have just so perfectly said it. Like there's a lot of beauty in what we do, and there's a lot of also ugly parts in what we do, but at the end of the day, like we're still here despite the challenges that we've had to go through, because the beauty outweighs the
Yes.
crap. I'm honestly at a loss for words. I
You could tell that I've spent a lot of time thinking about this. Like, this is genuinely something I think about, I've thought about so much over the last 5 years because I loved what I did. I loved my job at Minnesota United so much. It was really difficult leaving, but as you know, eventually we have to move on to push ourselves to do different things, to grow. I wanted more responsibility. Um, I wanted to maybe live somewhere else. But I loved like 99% of my day to day of that job. that when the tough stuff happened, I had to think constantly about like, okay, how can I move through this because I love everything else?
We could literally keep going
I know
forever
we
and
could,
ever.
but
It's
this could
so
be a
nice.
2-hour-long podcast, a 2-hour-long session.
It's so funny because I was really trying my best to keep it at 30 minutes, but it was like
Oh
at
my,
30
this
minutes.
was supposed to be 30 minutes?
Well, it didn't have to be. I was just like, I don't want to take up all her time. So, like, I think I even said, hey, we'll keep it to 30 minutes. But it wasn't until like 30 minutes when we really started getting deep. And I'm like, well, I can't freaking stop now. And I don't want to stop now. But I don't want to take all your
Look,
time.
if you're interviewing Hispanic women, it will never be 30 minutes, and you know that.
And I freaking love it. I love it. I'm going to end with, so I found this game in my parents'
Ooh.
basement. It's called We're Not Really Strangers.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
So it's like different levels, but level 2 is connection. So I'm gonna pick 3. Let's see. Let me see. Okay, I like this one for you. When was the last time that you surprised yourself?
Oof,
That's a hard one.
it is. Um, hmm. Oh, actually, not too long ago, I went to a concert by myself last weekend.
Yes.
As you maybe saw this on my Instagram, I went to see this band called Morat, which is a Colombian band. They had a show in Orlando. I have been obsessed with this band for years. I love them. I don't have any Hispanic friends in the Tampa area.
Hmm.
And my family in Miami, because they were also in Miami the next day. So I could have gone to that show if I could have found anybody in my family to have gone with me. No one wanted to go. They like I a little bit of context. I have a cousin who does PR in the music industry, so she has a lot of connections. So a lot of my family are very used to not paying for concert tickets, and
Uh-huh.
they were like, my aunt literally said it. I like this band. I don't like them enough to pay for the concert ticket, and I held off on buying the ticket for a really long time because like I don't want to go by myself. This is so depressing, and it was just like another theme of something I've been feeling a lot since I got here, that I'm doing all the things by myself. And I was like, I don't want to do this by myself. Who goes to a concert by herself? I bought the ticket. I got it for cheap. I drove to Orlando and back, and I had a freaking blast.
I'm so happy you did that. I have always it's like the weirdest thing. You go somewhere by yourself and immediately, like, even if it's like dinner or you're getting food, like the first thing I'll do is just like go on my phone because I'm like, this is awkward. I
Yep.
did do going to a concert by myself. I saw Anuel AA like back in 2019 because he was my top artist then. Best, like, if I hadn't got, the man walked in front of me,
Oh, nice.
and I'm like, if I hadn't gone to this, like, am I like,
You
and then
were
I ended up
missing.
going to Rao Alejandro by myself
Mm.
again 2 years later. Yeah, I'm like, like, imagine all the things that we've stopped ourselves from doing before just because we're like, oh, like, it would just be by myself. How awkward would
Yep.
that look? Nobody's like, I saw this thing that it's like,
Nobody
stop
around.
making
It's
your,
weird.
yeah, it's like, stop making yourself so important in other people's lives. Like, they don't
Nobody
give a
around. It's
crap. They're
weird.
not watching you. Exactly.
No. Like, the first hour where I'm just, like, sitting there waiting for the show to start was, like, uncomfortable and awkward,
That part does suck.
but like, the second they started playing, I was like, "I can sing and dance and just enjoy this along with everybody else around me who's singing and dancing. Like, we're all just here to watch this band, and, like, doesn't matter."
The
It's
best
great.
thing about doing stuff on your own time is like it's your experience. So like if you go with other people, maybe like you have to pick seats somewhere else because there's only 2 seats or the
Mhm.
money or whenever you leave for the concert and decide to go. No, 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 no.
No.
We're on my schedule. I want to get
Yep.
there at this time. I want to
Yes.
get this seat. It's the best. It
Exactly.
is the best.
It was
I'm so
great. I would say that was something incredibly outside of my comfort zone, but I was like, I have wanted to see this band for years. They don't make it to the Midwest.
yeah.
They're still relatively, like, new, so the fact that they're doing more shows in the US is a big deal in of its own, and for a long time, they didn't do anything outside of the South, this, like, southeastern region and probably, like, Southern California, but, like, I was like, "I'm here." This is, again, one of the pros of living in the state is seeing more Latin bands, seeing more
Yes.
Latin shows, and I'm not gonna go to this because no one wants to go with me? Screw that. I'll go by myself then. I'll pay the $50 and I'll just go by myself. I
I
like
love it.
driving.
I love it. I'm gonna see you doing this more often, I'm
Yes.
guessing, hopefully.
Yes.
All right, second one. I think this is another perfect one for you. What are you still trying to prove to yourself?
Oof. I am still trying to prove to myself that the second dream job that I chose is still attainable.
Yeah.
And that's something that I'm sort of in the middle of. And I am trying to prove to myself that I can do it because I feel like I still have things left to accomplish in that space, and that I don't have to leave sports to do it, despite many people trying to tell me that I should. Um, and people do so because they want you to be open. They don't want you
Yeah.
to limit yourself. It's not in the sense of like, don't do your dream, but it's people are trying to be helpful. Um, but I am not ready to not work in this industry anymore. I am not ready to take a break from this industry anymore. And so, as I try to figure out what I want for my career in the long term, no is proving to myself that I can still do that. I did it once and I can do it again.
Yes, I love that. And I mean, it's obviously good to have your options open, but when you know that you want to work in sports, like, don't give up on that just yet. Like, give yourself still the opportunity to be able to do that.
Yeah.
All right, let's pick a third one. All right, last one. What's been the best compliment that a stranger has ever given you? Or
Hmm.
maybe someone, or maybe it doesn't have to be a stranger if it's someone that you know, but what's been the best compliment that you've received that really resonated with you?
Oh, that's hard.
I had to give you these questions beforehand so you could have prepped. They're hard.
The first thing that pops into mind, and it's just so silly. I was at the gym months ago. Um, you know, Body image is always something that I think, and it's just like every woman sort of struggles with, and I know that men do too. But I was at the gym one day, was changing into my gym clothes after work, not feeling super great about how I've been looking and everything. And this girl who was just like so cute and like fit and like dressed like wonderfully for the gym, just like said, "You look so pretty. Like, you're so beautiful. You look so pretty today." And I was like, "It's just a random stranger at the gym." I was like, "Oh my God, that's so nice."
That's the best. I
It was so
compliments compliments from men, I'm like, no. Compliments from women, I'm like, I know that, like, means something. Like,
we
it's
don't
a
say
true
things.
compliment.
We don't say things if we don't mean them. Like,
Exactly. And
we get
better,
nothing from giving someone a bogus compliment, especially if
yes.
it's a stranger. Like, why would we do that?